Welcome back to another episode of Harmonious at Lunch, the show that fuels your business success. I'm Brandon Gano, your host and guide through the world of harmonious business growth. Today, we're unlocking powerful strategies with industry experts to help your business thrive. If you're a business owner, entrepreneur, or executive, you are in the right place. Join me and our incredible guests today on the journey to clarity, growth, and success. It is time to revolutionize your approach to business. Let's dive in with another episode of Harmonious at Lunch. Welcome back into some more bite-sized business advice. And today's episode is going to be an interesting conversation. We're talking about learn-it-all leadership versus know-it-all leadership, and then also building a learn-it-all culture for your company. I think this is a very important topic, and we have a very special guest with us, Damon Lembi. Welcome to the show, and thank you for being here.
Brandon, it's an honor to be here. So thanks for having me.
I'm excited for this conversation, and I want to hit you with the tough question right out of the gate here. I have a mentor that always says we teach what we're supposed to learn in life. And this topic of learn it all versus know it all, I have to ask, were you at one point a know it all and you had to teach yourself through this process, or am I totally crazy?
So here's how I look at it, learn it all and know it all. I don't think you're ever 100% one or the other. I think sometimes you ebb and flow. I would like to say that most of the time I'm a learn-it-all and I have some know-it-all in me. But some people are vastly know-it-alls, and we can get into that. So I've typically been a learn-it-all where I've been open to learning and curious. But going back early on in my business career, when Learnit was doing really well, back in the late 90s, I'm dating myself here, I was definitely a know-it-all. I really wanted to expand. I told my dad, I'm like, I want to open up a bunch of locations. And he kind of recommended against it, but I didn't want to hear what he had to say because I had all the answers. I knew what I wanted to do. And I went for it. We went for it. Then the economy collapsed, .com bust happened. And that really opened my eyes to what happens if you are a know-it-all and you put your stake in the ground and you're not curious and you're not open.
Yeah, I love that answer too. I mean, I can see how we kind of put on different hats in different aspects of life. So walk me through your kind of transition there. You obviously you were forced into taking a step back, as many people were in that economy, along with 2008 and COVID. I think this happens to us repeatedly, and it's our opportunity to take stock in what we're doing and how we're doing it. So your transition from being more of a know-it-all into adopting this learn-it-all mentality and really taking more information in from different perspectives. What was that process like for you personally?
Well, so Learnit was around. We're coming on 30 years now, which is incredible. And around that time in 2000, I became the CEO around late 1998. And we went forward with all this expansion, like I told you about. And quite frankly, if I didn't have my family's backing and financing available, we would have been out of business. There's no way we would have made it through. And so it was a very humbling experience, having to call your grandfather and your dad every couple of weeks and say, hey, how's it going, guys? Can I borrow $20,000 to cover payroll? Incredibly, incredibly humbling experience. They always agreed. My grandfather would be a little bit more pissed off than my dad. And my dad liked to say, hey, you got one of the most expensive real world MBAs there are. So let's make the best out of it. I mean, that's exactly what he would say. And it really helped me open up my mind and my eyes to say, a business leader, small business leader, or anybody, you can't have all the answers. So it's incredibly important to surround yourself with people who you can tap into and learn from your mistakes. And it was super helpful for me because by the time 2008 came around, I didn't have the same financial backing. My family wasn't in the same position. We got hit really hard in the real estate market with what happened then. And so early on, I learned okay, what did we do in the last time, and how do we get through this downturn? And I turned to some mentors and some other people that have had experience going through difficult situations, and with our team. And we made a lot of adjustments. We ripped off the Band-Aid. We let go 25% of our staff, had a bunch of difficult conversations. And I wouldn't have been able to do all that if I didn't look at the challenging time we had before and learn to pivot and do things differently.
So how do you take that mindset moving forward? How do you continue to be a learn it all leader and say, you know what, even after 30 years, I mean, because a lot of people could sit back and say, yeah, 30 years, we've seen it all, we've made it through it all. You have a pandemic, you have two economic collapses. I mean, you've been through a lot in 30 years, and to still have the discipline to say, I need to seek outside help. I need to continue learning and improve myself. How do you do that on a day-to-day basis? Who do you surround yourself with to make that possible?
Well, the first reason I do it on a day-to-day basis is because I kind of feel like I owe it to my team to be the best version of myself. I think leadership starts with yourself. And even on a call earlier today, where one of our employees, his wife went into labor, they're having a kid, and somebody else on the call said, "Man, Damon, with Learnit, we've got a lot of families we're supporting here." So, Brandon, I look at it like this is partially my responsibility to make sure that I'm staying relevant and that we have this competitive drive so we can continue to grow and innovate. And, on my podcast, I've interviewed a lot of great leaders, super successful people, and the vast majority of them come at it with that humble, curious attitude, instead of thinking, look, I've already hit this level, it's gonna stop here. Because quite frankly, if you achieve a bunch of success, and you might look at it like, hey, what else do I need to do to prove myself? And if you do that, I think that you're gonna get passed over. So I have my own personal reasons for wanting to do it. Plus, I just enjoy learning. I think it makes you more interesting. And if you're curious and you meet people and you can learn from them, I think you're doing yourself a favor, and obviously the organization that you lead.
Yeah, I agree. And it sounds a little bit like what you just said was some level of imposter syndrome, where you said, you know, what else do I have to do to prove myself? Where does that play a role in this conversation?
So with imposter syndrome, growing up, I was a baseball player and did pretty well. I was a high school All-American, got drafted, but I went the college route. And when I first got to Pepperdine, the college I went to, I really dealt with imposter syndrome for the first time because like everybody was as good as I was. And I wasn't sure whether or not I even belonged. And I developed a framework that kind of helped me work through that imposter syndrome. Um, and I think that everybody has imposter syndrome at some level. And if they say they don't, then they're either lying or maybe they're a sociopath. And it doesn't stop, And so the best way to get through that is to, that 4-step framework really quickly is number one, like label your fear. If I get promoted into a new manager role, you might think to yourself, well, I don't even know if I'm good enough to lead people. Well, what's the worst thing that could happen? You fall flat on your face and maybe you get demoted or whatever. You can make it through. And the second step is like really putting in the work, work hard. 3 is deliberate practice. If you're moving into a new manager role for the first time and you want to get better at coaching people, think about what you can focus on becoming a better coach. And then the final step, I'm going through this quickly. And then the final step is really like, it's time to learn and let go. So in baseball, I had a hard time hitting curveballs, so I just focused on hitting curveballs all the time. In giving keynotes, sometimes I would struggle with different things, so I'd focus on certain techniques. But when you step in a batter's box, or let's say you step on stage, it's stop thinking about your technique and everything you're doing and just do your best. And, you might knock it out of the park, you might strike out. Either way, you look at it like you're going to survive, and also it's a learning opportunity for you. So again, it's an opportunity to learn and grow, maybe even get some feedback. And also pat yourself on the back, because too many people don't get uncomfortable enough to even try things. And here you are, you're going for it, you're trying it. And so I think that that's where imposter syndrome, kind of falls in there. And I think you should be proud of yourself for giving it a shot.
I agree. I am excited to report that based on your criteria, I am not a sociopath because I too have imposter syndrome sometimes. So that's awesome news to hear. As far as, and I love the framework too. We could probably spend a whole episode just unpacking that for yourself as a leader and developing leadership. But I do want to shift into building a learn it all culture because that's something that I think is probably more important. I don't want to say more important, but it's definitely harder to do. Inspiring yourself to develop your leadership, a whole new mentality and how they go about operating, that could be very, very challenging. So how do entrepreneurs and business leaders start to develop a learn it all versus a know it all culture, or really even just a culture of people who want to get better?
Yeah, you could call it a learn it all culture. That's what we do it around here, and we also talk about that with our customers. But I like to also refer to it as a learning organization. How are you developing a culture of learning? And like a lot of things, it all starts at the top. It needs to be modeled by the CEO and leadership. They have to buy into it and believe it themselves. And I'm not necessarily saying that a learning culture is okay, you got to take a bunch of formal training all the time. To me, a learning culture is an organization that cares and supports their people and also gives them the psychologically safe space to try things. You delegate tasks and responsibilities to people, put them in charge of projects or on projects, then you give them the space to do their best. And if they fail, it's okay. Let's turn it into a learning opportunity. And when you do that, when people feel like that they're not going to get reprimanded if things don't go well and that their team has their back, I mean, you build a lot of trust. And then you'll find that innovation and curiosity, it builds up from everywhere. So that's really how I believe you build a learn it all culture. Is you start with the top, leaders get involved, and then you provide space for people to try and do things differently. And when it comes to formal training or coaching, that you invest in your people. I think a lot of great organizations invest up to 1.5 to 2% of their annual income on annual revenue on investing in their team. And by the way, that is so far less expensive than it is on attrition. So it costs you sometimes 3 times as much to replace a high performer than it does just investing time in them. So put aside money, invest in learning and development for your team, and then give them the space to be able to take that training. I like to call it learning time off. So instead of PTO, LTO, where you have a day or a couple hours where people can actually go in and learn new skills. Because at the end of the day, with how the world's moving, especially with AI, sometimes it's not even about the skills you have now. It's about the ability to continue to learn and adapt and grow, which I think is super important.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal idea too. And I'm curious how you position that, because I've seen a lot of companies do it where, it's kind of like a requirement to go learn and
Check
do
the box.
professional development, all that stuff. Yeah. So how do you incentivize people to do that by just saying like, we want you to do it so you're a better you and a more happy you versus, well, this is kind of how you're going to get promoted in 6 months or however other people traditionally propose that. But how do you recommend that conversation?
Well, that's a great question. And I think a lot of it has to tie back to the why and their purpose. Hopefully in your organization, you understand what your individual employees, what's exciting to them, what their purpose is, and hopefully it aligns with the purpose of your organization. And then you can, again, like I said, you could tie that back to learning. So if you go in and you learn these skills, here's how it's going to benefit you. Because people want to know how it's going to benefit them. It's going to give you more confidence. You're going to be able to do this differently. And when you do that, then they'll look at it more as than just a check the box, like this is something we have to do. One of the biggest challenges that we see throughout organizations, with that being said, is middle managers. Middle managers are already stretched so thin in their organization that sometimes they're hard to get on board with setting aside time for their team members to be able to do training, because they're like, man, we're already backed up and so overwhelmed as it is. Now you want everybody to go through training. And in that situation, when we come work with new clients, or existing clients even, we work with the middle managers and get them involved, get them into some of the training themselves so they can see directly the benefit it does both for them and for their organization.
I like that. And I guess I have to end with another tough question, because everything you're saying is beautiful. I love it. And I wish more people would incorporate this in their organizations. I'm sure you do too. But you did say something earlier when developing a learn it all culture. You said it has to start at the top, it has to be modeled, right? So as a leader, for someone listening to this, or maybe someone reading your book or hearing this somehow, is how are you able to take an audit, a self audit, and even understand which side of the line your company culture is on right now? Because you may hear all this and say this is great, but your employees are looking at you like, not going to happen. That's not you don't model any of this stuff, pal. So how can we just take an honest assessment of where we are in our companies?
Well, that's a great question. And that kind of gets tied back into just being able to receive feedback, anyways. There's a lot of talk always about giving feedback. I think one of the superpowers out there is being able to receive feedback because it turns into fuel for growth. So it's just being able to ask questions or do surveys and just get an honest opinion from people out there. Like, what is the culture like? Does your organization say that they support training and learning, but they don't actually do so? And when you're building out a learning program or whatever, get people involved right away. And sometimes bring in new people to the organization. Like, you just came on board here. What are some things that you need to be successful in your role? And then reflect back on that later on and do periodic check-ins with people and say, hey, we talk a big game, but are we living it as well? Are our actions in line with what we're saying we're going to do? And I think you constantly have to be able to do that. And whether it's as an organization or just an individual as a leader, you got to have enough self-awareness and reflection to be able to do that. And some leaders do and some don't, but you got to be honest with yourself and you got to be open to feedback as far as what people really see your culture as and compared to what you say it is.
Yeah. Know-it-alls. I'm putting that in air quotes. Not real good at hearing feedback. So
they have no interest in it most of the time.
No,
and they want to argue it too. They want to argue and tell you how you're wrong. And by the way, feedback is just data. You don't have to do something with it all the time, but you got to at least be open and say to yourself, okay, this is a good point. Maybe this person has something here.
Yeah, I agree. I hope this episode impacts a lot of people, because it's such a great way to build just a solid company foundation, and change the perspective and build a more collaborative culture too. So Damon, I love everything you're talking about here. You wrote a book, you have a podcast, you have a company. Where should people go to learn more about you and about this concept of a learn it all organization?
Last thing I want to say on it, it's really not that difficult. If you just make some small steps within your organization and as yourself to become more of a learn it all than a know it all. And also, learning doesn't mean spend all your time learning. You got to apply some of the stuff you learn as well. So
yeah.
To answer your question, connect with me on LinkedIn at Damon Lembi. Our company website is learnit.com. And also check out my podcast, the Learn It All podcast, where I bring on great leaders from all different industries and backgrounds and just have open conversations and provide practical advice.
Awesome. I love it. Learnit.com on the screen in the show notes, along with all the other links that Damon mentioned. They're down in the description, wherever you're watching or listening. Last little question here. You have to spend a little bit of time learning every day. I think at least 15 minutes of that should be listening to the Harmonious at Lunch podcast. Am I onto something there?
You're absolutely onto something there. And when it comes to learning, you don't need to spend 5-6 hours. Just, put on Brandon's podcast, go get a coffee, walk around the block, and not only will you get something out of it, figure out how you can position it and apply it in your own work life.
I love it. That was such a terrible self-promotion, but you made it actually applicable. So thank you for that, Damon. This was fantastic. Whether you're watching or listening, do that. subscribe to the show. We'll see you back tomorrow on another episode of Harmonious at Lunch. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Harmonious at Lunch podcast. Make sure you subscribe on whatever platform you're on, and we want to invite you to join us in the Small Business Success Facebook group, our private group where guests and listeners come together to grow your business. We want impact-driven entrepreneurs who are ready to go to the next level in this group so we can all share ideas, collaborate, and grow our businesses together. Go to whatif.com/group, and we want to invite you to join today. See you on the next episode of Harmonious at Lunch.